I'm here with Nick Levett, who many of you will know. It almost needs no introduction. He's been in the talent space alongside me for quite a long time. I first met Nick. He may not remember this actually, but I first met Nick when I was delivering a workshop on talent development, and I'll never forget this bloke in a maroon jumper basically calling me out and saying some of your research is a load of old tosh, and we've been firm friends ever since. Anyway, Nick, great to have you on as my co-host for a regular co-host for the Talent Equation podcast. Do you want to just introduce yourself to the people out there?
Yeah, morning. I do remember that moment actually. It was at Crawley Leisure Centre.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Which I'm sure not many people that will watch this have ever been to.
It's an amazing leisure centre, actually, isn't it?
It was very good, yeah. Although I vaguely remember it was built for the Olympics, so they built a 50-metre swimming pool. But they didn't account for the width of the tiles at the end of the pool, so it ended up being like 49.98 metres. I think that's one of the strange quirks of that place. If memory serves me right,
so any records set at that pool are done so falsely.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Although they also worked out that the Brighton Marathon last week was 146 metres short of a marathon as well, or something ridiculous like that. So, so yeah. So yeah, I've worked obviously in the world of sports development and talent for a long time. Coached at grassroots all the way through to professional game kind of end of things, and the joys of being a parent, which I think will be part of the topic that we'll talk about today. So yeah, a reasonable breadth in the world of sport. I have a view of the world that's different to you, and that's probably different to everybody else watching. So I can only share my views of it. But yeah, they've been working in that kind of education sport space for quite a long time now. So yeah, all good fun.
And that's why I think we have such rich conversations, which is why I'm so happy that we're able to do this, because we've got these different perspectives, and I think bouncing around different ideas and debating different ideas is what it's all about, and it's how we can help to sort of move the industry along. So you mentioned the subject of today, which is parents. So I think what stimulated this was recently I was involved in doing some stuff on radio with the media, just talking about the impact of coaches and also talking about the challenges of recruiting and developing coaches, and some of the challenges that clubs are having in terms of retaining coaches. And it was a phone in, and quite a lot of people rang in and expressed a real difficulty because from a coaching perspective, they're there doing a job, usually as a volunteer, helping out. Quite often they're a parent themselves, and one of the kids is their child. They're developing this environment for these kids, trying to help them develop. And all they seem to be getting is criticism, or they're getting this implied sense of you're not doing a good enough job, whatever it might be, from parents. Or in some cases, you've got parents being, physically, mentally, psychologically abusive to those individuals who are just trying to do a good job. And many of them were saying that, it was making them really think about whether they should continue in this role or not, and what was it all about? What was the point? So that's kind of where we're starting from, and just wanted to kind of hand it over to you and get some thoughts that you've got around this area. And then what we might then do as we move into this is to start to sort of share some of the potential solutions that people could use when they're in that coaching space to help them navigate through this pretty challenging scenario.
Yeah, I think historically it's always been one of those challenges that's come up. It always gets raised by coaches on coach education events. Part of me, and it might be an idealistic view, I like to think that the majority of parents are great and they take their son or daughter along to a sporting experience of whatever kind of nature. And most of them will come from a good place about why they're there and their behaviour and all that kind of thing. But it's always the minority that shout the loudest, that create the hassle and the grief for the coaches and also for the kids and the officials as well. And and sadly, they're the ones that we end up talking about. So yeah, so it's certainly a challenge in the sports space. I do think they come from a good place. I genuinely don't think that parents honestly understand the impact that they have. But it's only when you start to get feedback from coaches, the kids playing, and the officials that you actually then realise that actually sometimes it might be well intended, but actually the impact is probably not what they would expect. And I think sometimes we've got to be brave and ask people their opinion on different things. But yeah, without doubt it is an issue, probably of society and sport in general. I don't think it's unique to any one sport. And I'm sure that kind of phone-in had a variety of different sports where parents were still an issue.
Yeah, you're right. It was mixed bag. It wasn't any single sport. I think there's probably sports that have this more prevalent than others, and what have you. But I think certainly I detect anyway that professional sports tend to have a bit more of an impact, because I think often parents, it's not just about going along and giving their child a great participation experience. There's another agenda behind this, isn't there? Which is, my child's going to play as a professional in a variety of things. So there's a little bit of an extra driver there, whether that's overt or implicit, that I think can sometimes make people act slightly differently. I don't know. I mean, I'm speculating slightly. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, yeah, and interesting. So I was thinking about this morning, and thinking back to a conversation I had with a parent. So I went to a professional football tournament at the weekend, and chatted to parents on the side, and there was a range of very good parents that just kind of sat down in a chair and didn't say a lot, and applauded good play from both teams. There were some really random things that were said. Stood next to one mum who just wanted to just bark and just slap. And I was like, well, what does slap it even mean? I wasn't really quite sure what that was about. But I had one conversation with the dad, and I was watching the first game of the tournament, and I was just sat down on the grass bank, and the guy was about 5 yards to my right with his wife. I'm assuming it was his wife. Watching the game, and he shouted a lot of stuff during the game, which was a real mixed amount. There was some good stuff in there, well done, some praise and some good feedback, but there was also a lot of information, kind of direct instruction. And bear in mind, the kids are probably 60, 70 yards away, yet he still felt the need to shout and scream. So I'm not entirely sure that the kids even pay any attention, is one thing that I think is worth discussing. But the second thing is I had a conversation with him in the second half. And the conversation started with him telling me about how bad some other parents were. And why he decides to stand where he does, away from the rest of the parents, because, they shout a lot of stuff. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, that's just you. So part of me even thinks that they don't even have the self-awareness to recognise sometimes that they're doing it as well. And I don't know why that is. And I don't know if they just see themselves as fine and what they're saying is all right and what everyone else says is rubbish. But they just didn't have any awareness that they were part of the problem.
So here's the problem. Here's our issue, isn't it? Is that it's one thing dealing with somebody who knows what they're doing, they're willfully doing it. It's another thing when somebody doesn't actually know that they're doing it. So, what do we? I mean, with this particular scenario, I think I've seen this before where people aren't aware of their behaviour enough to be able to regulate it. So there's always going to be a challenge there. And you've probably heard of, and I've heard of, organisations or sports policymakers who've gone down the road of, kind of silent sidelines or silent Sundays, where the only thing that the people on the sideline are allowed to do is applaud. They can't cheer, and that causes some significant debate. And I'm not 100% sure whether I think that kind of legislation is is the right way to go, because you're not really solving the problem. You're just regulating it out of existence.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. I mean, the conversation I ended up having with this guy, because at one stage, while I was stood chatting to him, and he was telling me about his kids and their play and what clubs they've been at before and their kind of journey. At one moment, like, a kid got the ball, got through towards goal, and he was shouting then at the kid to shoot, but the kid didn't. As a defender come across, and he turned and went back out of the box, and actually ended up keeping possession, but went kind of all the way back to near the halfway line, but maintained possession. And I said to him, well, why did you shout and tell him to shoot at that stage? So what were you kind of thinking? Because from where we're standing, which was 20 yards from the pitch, 15 yards from the pitch, at the halfway line, the player was probably 80 yards away. And I said, well, we don't have any kind of view that kid has at this moment. And don't you think if he had the opportunity to shoot, the kid's going to try and score? Because, that's what kids do. They get near the goal, they want to slap it, in that other mum's terms. But I said, you've got no view of what that kid saw, what that kid thought. So why did you think it was then right? And he said, I've never really thought about that. I just think that's what you should do. I said, well, yeah, but he probably thinks that's what you should do as well, but clearly couldn't, because he had to turn out, keep the ball, and try and work their way towards the goal in a different way. And he went, I've just never thought about it like that. That's what I would do there. And I'm like, but you're not there. Mm. And also you're not 13. Mm. So and he went, I just never thought about it. So, all right, okay. I just kind of left it with him, really. And it's sometimes those, conversations to try and highlight another person's viewpoint that can have an effect on education, as much as, like you said, the challenge of, trying to just take out the behaviour doesn't necessarily make people aware of their own behaviour.
So in that scenario then, you're obviously you happen to be there in whatever capacity, and you're able to have that kind of conversation. But you're not the coach in that scenario, are you?
No, absolutely not. I was, I was in branded kit, so he knew where I was from, mm-hmm. which probably has a level of credibility to the badge. It doesn't bring a level of credibility to me as a person necessarily.
Yeah.
But he was all right about it. We had a pretty good conversation. But I can imagine, and this wasn't me telling him what to do or how to act. It was me kind of raising awareness of that player in that situation, and to try and make him think about his own behaviour, not to stop or start it. That's not my position. But yeah, it's a challenging one, absolutely, and even more so for the coach who was on the opposite side of the pitch.
Well, that's the issue for me. I think is sort of at the heart of the issue is, would you suggest then that a coach could do the same thing, could engage the individual, engage either individuals or as a group, and open their minds in this way to how their sideline behaviour can affect the participant, not only their experience but their ability to learn and develop.
I think you absolutely have to do that. I simply, from a coach's perspective, just for your own sanity, just so that the parents kind of get off the kids' back and let the kids play as much as anything. And it might be kind of verging into the bits of discussion for later, but it's then how you do it and when you do it and what's the right kind of format to do it. And there's certainly things that I can talk about that I've done in the past to try and challenge that, because I think you have to try and do that, and that's part of a code of conduct and setting that kind of agreement out, really. Well, is that something that you think you've done before?
Yeah, in fact, I did it this year, and I'm very fortunate, I think, with the sport that I'm involved in. I'm involved in hockey, and generally speaking, I think don't tend to have a great deal of issues with parental behaviour, particularly directed at me. But I do have some issues with parental behaviour directed at the participant, at the players.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, again, it's just that kind of, again, I think you're right. It goes back to this point of, it's either one of two things. It's overzealousness, it's enthusiasm, it's passion, emotional investment in the individual, in the part, it's their child after all. They want them to do well and to enjoy things and all those sorts of things. And it is this issue as well of self-awareness. And I think sometimes it's that I'm reading a book at the moment, which is really interesting it's actually about survival. But one of the things they talk about is the way the brain works under emotional stress, or in an emotional scenario. And when emotion kind of takes over, rational thought switches off.
Yeah.
Being. And so you can kind of understand that when people are in a sort of emotional context, i.e. emotionally invested in the sporting performance of their child, that they're not thinking rationally. The brain switched off. They're just acting in a certain way. And I think that's often where, for example, somebody like yourself asking that question makes people reflect and think, do I really do that? Is that really the way I behave? I think often people are quite shocked.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They don't even know they're doing it.
Yeah. So one of the things I was interested in, and I think we can be quite free flowing with this. I don't think we necessarily need to take it in order, but you kind of alluded to a couple of things there around the approach you would take. I mean, one approach I use is actually make it a joke. So I actually there's one particular parent, and don't get me wrong, she's great and she really helps out. She's the one who always collects the money and all these sorts of things whenever we go to a festival or whatever. But she does, she does get over the top. She gets too involved. So we just make it a constant joke. We just have a bit of banter and go, oh, here we go, and that I think keeps it in check. I mean, there's still a degree of volume, but it sort of just stops it from getting a bit too far. And I think that's quite a soft way of potentially tackling the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, without doubt. I think one of the most powerful things that I found is feedback from the kids. Because as a parent, your child is the most valuable thing to you in the world, and I don't think you would want to knowingly upset or make them unhappy or embarrass them. And if you knew that, and if you knew your behaviour on the side of a picture was doing that, I think most parents would probably be mortified and check themselves a little bit about that. And so I've done plenty of sessions of forums with kids where, whether it's tasks about why you play and what your motivations are, or talking to them about how it makes them feel with their parents on the side of the pitch, and you get some. This is without the parents there, and you get some fascinating stuff because I spend most of my time doing this with kind of 9, 10, 11-year-old kids, and they'll be as honest as anything. And some of the stuff that the kids say, you've only just got to go and show the parents this, and they just go, okay, I'm never doing that again. I remember one kid saying, he said, when my mum shouts at me, it feels like a massive spotlight on me in front of all my mates, and I just get really embarrassed. Now, you don't even have to go out and show the mum that, but it's just like, look, this is what your kids are saying. And I was at one game, and there was a mum. I don't know why it's often mums, but sometimes is. And one of the big feedback actually from a lot of the sessions that we did was that mums embarrass sons. That came through as a fairly kind of big thing because they just shout random things at the kids when they're playing. And I was stood at one game, and her mum was just shouting at her son who was playing on the wing right next to her, come on, come on, come on. And he just stopped during the game, and he just went, Mum, I'm not a horse. And it's that kind of thing that, like you said, you make it into a joke, but that's the reality for mum. So I've done a variety of these kind of things where just getting all the kids sat down in a classroom at the start and all the parents stood at the back and doing these kind of feedback sessions where kids can talk about their feelings about their parents on the side of the pitch. And you get a lot of great stuff of, it makes me feel really proud when I've done something great. My dad claps and smiles at me, and you get some of this, and it's really kind of like heartwarming stuff, which is brilliant. But then you get the kids to be honest and share some of the negative side of it, and the parents' faces just drop. And then the other thing I did, I turned it into a practical thing. So I said to all the parents at training, and I was working with a group of under-8s, a grassroots football team, under-8s, and we were quite new. We had a mixture of under-7s and under-8s, and we weren't great as a footballing team, but the kids came along every week. They had a great time. It was really good. And I said to the parents, because we started to get a few little things creep in, right, next week, parents, I want you to all bring your trainers. And everyone was saying, what do you mean? I said, well, bring your trainer because you're going to be, joining in. And the look of horror on some of the parents' faces was like, oh my God. So no, it'll be fine, honestly. So what I did, I got the parents to then play a match, and I got the kids to stand on the outside and shout and scream at the parents, and when Dad realised that he had no left foot, and Mum realised that she couldn't control and kick it where she wanted it to go, and we got everybody round at the end and said, right, parents, tell us what you think about that experience. And they were like, right, oh my God, right, that was awful. I said, good. Now imagine that in the mind of your 7 and 8 year old child and how you think they feel. And we had this really kind of deep and honest conversation, and we had never had a problem at all for the rest of the season. Parents were brilliant. And always every now and then we used to just kind of have to reference back to, imagine when you played? Yeah, okay, fine. And the real simple strategy I said to him was, look, go to the service station. And you know where you can get you get 2 of those fold up chairs for 12 quid in the services. They're brilliant. They've got a little cup holder and everything. I said, go and get yourself 2 of them, come to the game and just sit down and watch. And it's fascinating the impact on parents when they're sitting down and watching rather than standing up.
Right, okay.
Sometimes it's those real kind of simple little tactics, rather than saying and criticising someone else's behaviour, but just making them aware of their own behaviour can have an impact. I certainly remember one parent, I said, look, it got to the stage where, look, here's your choice. You can either drop your kid off and go to Sainsbury's, or unfortunately you're going to have to find another club for them to play at because your behaviour is affecting everyone else's enjoyment. And sometimes it does come to that.
So you, in that context, I mean, this is all gold dust. Firstly, just to pick up on that, I mean, I love the idea, by the way, I've never considered that, but I love the idea of getting the parents to play and getting the kids to be the so-called supporters.
Yeah,
That's fascinating. I've never thought of that one as well. The interesting thing about actually the physical side of it, sit down, change the behaviour, change the position, changes the behaviour. And I also think there's that very direct conversation, that honest conversation of you need to be somewhere else. And I think that's the one probably people are most fearful of. So I'd be interested to know how you handled that discussion. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, is that something that you've had to do before?
Once or twice, in different ways. I had a scenario. Well, in fact, I've had a very recent scenario. It's not quite as extreme as that, but I had a very interesting scenario recently where a new player came. And his dad brought him along, and I could, when you sort of just get a funny feeling, this dad just seemed a bit too keen. This was a training session, not a match. He was just a bit interested, too interested, and he was sort of in the training session telling him to do this and do that and do the other. And I'd not seen him before, so I walked over to him and introduced myself. I said, "Hi, I'm Stuart. I'm the coach. Da, da, da. How you doing?" I said, "This is your son. Yeah. He's new, is he? Okay, yeah. He's been doing a bit. Okay, great. Yeah, brilliant. We're good to have him on board." I said, "Just one thing that we're big on here is when we're coaching, we let the kids play. I'll help him with different things and I'll give him inputs, but that's kind of my role. When it comes to the parents, by all means, if you want to volunteer and get involved and help out, I'd be delighted to have you on board. We're always looking for more people to get involved. But when he's here, let him play. Let me look after him because that's what I do." And he took it on board. I could tell he wasn't exactly 100% happy about it. I could tell he didn't necessarily, but I could almost immediately see, okay, I get it. I know where you're there. I'm here. I get. There's a different kind of role. He then at one point then moved into the space. So like we had a couple of different games going on, and he moved over closer to his son's game so that he could watch it more closely. And I had to say, just need to let him get on with it, because it's just, I could just tell he wasn't being, but it was just one of those things where he was just a bit too interested. And I was like, well, we're just gonna have to make some boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, what you've done is a great method of doing it there, because I think if you go from having never had a conversation with the parent about their behaviour to saying, right, you're not welcome, don't come back, that's a challenge. So I think what you've done really nicely there is kind of scaffold that a little bit. So, recognise that they're new and they might not understand the way that you do things. to help them kind of understand, and that might take a few weeks to bed in. It's any kind of behaviour change. You can't expect them to suddenly just stop and change overnight. So what I think you've done really nicely is kind of scaffold that up so you can start to reinforce that. And clubs will have codes of conduct with the parents about their behaviour, and sometimes you might need to then go back to that to just kind of recognise and right, this is what we've agreed to do, and hopefully it's you get towards that stage where you've tried lots of different things to try and help them recognise their behaviour before you get to that ultimate kind of one of, look, unfortunately this is what it's come to. And it's a bit like a kid playing, really. Sometimes, kids' behaviour might be questionable, but you can't go from not challenging a kid's behaviour to saying, right, go home, you're not welcome. It's general kind of behaviour management that you just kind of scaffold it up gently to get to the point.
Yeah, and I'm very mindful as well that parents derive a great deal of enjoyment from watching their children play. I mean, I know I certainly do, and part of the reason I'm coaching is because I derive such a great sense of watching them all. To be honest, watching them all play and watching them all develop. But certainly, obviously, either my daughter or my son, their participation, I derive a great sense of well-being from that. So I don't want to deprive anybody else from having, that enjoyment. But it's just when they are bordering or going to step over the line and become something potentially destructive, and I think you're right. It's that kind of, I think it's almost like a preemptive motion, because if you neglect that, or you avoid it, or you don't deal with it, and you let those little behaviours manifest, and they become worse and worse and worse, and then you have to go nuclear on it. Well, that's a really regret. You don't want to get to that point, do you?
No, absolutely. Yeah, you can't go from 2 miles an hour to light speed. Absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely right.
It's like parenting, isn't it? I mean, if you allow small transgressions in behaviour to continue, they'll become bigger things. So I think from a parenting standpoint, that once you've sort of created your boundaries for children, you have to be really robust on those, because the minute you allow those to you're slightly relaxed on those sorts of things around the behaviour that you expect, then of course you shouldn't expect then your children to be able to understand, oh, well, it was all right last week, but now you're stamping down on it. Well, that seems a little bit inconsistent.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's an interesting one for you then. So I've never seen you coach. I can imagine you're a nightmare on the side of the pitch, and I'm only joking. But do you think that if you've got a coach that is a nightmare on the side of the pitch, and we all see them, and the coach is sometimes the one that's leading that behaviour, it then almost opens the door that it's acceptable for parents to behave in that way? That, oh, well, I see the coach doing it, and therefore I can do the same thing. Do you see anything of that? Do you think there's an impact of that?
I think some of this stems from the fact that whether it's the coach themselves doing it, or it's coaches that are seen publicly, particularly in the professional sport context and the way they behave. And I think there's definitely some mimicry or some modelling there. I totally agree with you. If you have shouty coaches on the sideline, you're going to get shouty parents on the sideline. There's just no doubt about that.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting one to just kind of see if there is a correlation between the two things. And then if you get a good coach that therefore does it quite well in the way that you talked about, how you might model that behaviour, therefore you don't actually see a problem with your parents.
You joke about me on the sideline. It's something that I've had to work on over the years, because before I became aware of all these sorts of different potential downsides to acting in this way to the young players, I was probably just like anybody else, so, and quite naturally, like you say, I'm emotionally invested. So it's something that I don't think I see it as a practice. It's not something that I get right every single time. There's definitely times when I might interject in a slightly overzealous way, but it's something that I have to keep a lid on, and just keep, again, self-awareness, keep myself, in check, because, I'm aware of the potential downsides, both from the people on the sideline and the people who are actually in the field of activity.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're a higher qualified coach that has that kind of self-awareness. what advice kind of would you give to maybe a level 1 coach that's new into it, that hasn't had to kind of go about ever managing a group of parents, and they might work in a world that's so far removed from sport they've never really had to kind of deal with this. How would you kind of go about giving some advice to that coach?
Well, I think one of the mantras I have, and I developed this, in the last probably 10 years, I guess, is if I have to shout instructions on the sideline, all that is doing is magnifying what I haven't done in training.
Okay, all right.
So and that's what I sort of say to myself. If I shout things, then I'm basically saying, it's my fault. This is my flaw. This is what we haven't covered yet. So I've either got two choices. I either go, right, well, we haven't covered it. Therefore, what's the point of me shouting about it? Because they don't know anything. They won't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The second thing is, if we haven't covered it, and they don't know about it, then I don't necessarily want to make that public.
Yeah.
It's my so me shouting is my failing. Shouting instructions is my failing. Now, what I sometimes do that's different, if I am vocal on the sideline, it's in the form of a question. So I'll say to the players, for example, I'll say, where is the space? Because I want to direct their attention to something that we've been working on.
Yeah.
Because that's about engagement. That's not necessarily about just move to this space, or do this or do that. So I'm trying not to be instructional. I'm trying to engage them cognitively.
Mm-hmm.
But advice for the player my advice to somebody new is to think about it in those terms. Think about it around the idea of, do you really want to advertise to the world your failings and limitations? Because it might be either you haven't covered it or they haven't learnt it. Oh yeah, sorry, that's the other point. They haven't learnt it. And
yeah.
Well, you need to do something to help them learn it. If it's something you've covered but they haven't learnt it, then you really need to go into that in more detail. So that's something else you don't necessarily want to advertise.
So you might have the parents then trying to fill the gaps as well for the kids. So is that then a conversation that you would pick up with them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you're robbing them. The parents and I would be robbing them of a learning experience.
Yeah, great point.
I can link to a blog post I wrote about this recently, which was about if you tell them what to do, then they're not having the opportunity to find out.
Yeah.
Now, you might direct their attention to an option, but that's very different from telling them what to do. Like shoot, yeah, sure. For example, slap it.
Slap it, please. Yeah, I'm using that forever now. Slap it.
Okay, so what advice would you give?
Yeah, I think you have to have the base of things like a code of conduct in place at the start of the season, so everybody kind of understands this is how we behave as a club.
Yeah.
I think it has to be consistent throughout the club. So some clubs that have under 7s through to under 18s or first team, you can't have the parents of one age group behaving very differently to another age group.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes somebody responsible at the club or on the committee needs to take a lead across all age groups.
Yeah.
Because if you're under 8s and your under 10s are playing at home one week, and the under 8s see that the under 10s parents can get away with it and it's not managed, then they might think it's okay to do that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it can be a club-wide thing. I think some leagues can take a responsibility on it as well. Through forums, meetings, etc., about managing behaviour. I think grassroots leagues have a role on that as well.
Yeah.
About what is acceptable.
Yeah.
So yeah, without doubt, I think other people have got to play a role. We then kind of get into that field of parents abusing officials. So again, it's how you kind of go about starting to manage that.
I think that might be a good subject for a further cast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's another part. Well, it's coaches and parents probably giving officials grief.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we can certainly discuss that one at a future time as well.
I think some other advice I'd probably give is, I think often when coaches are complaining about the behaviour of parents, I want to ask them the question, what have you done to establish a behavioural code or an expectation of what is acceptable behaviour? What have you done to make people aware of what is and isn't acceptable? Because if people don't know what is and isn't acceptable, and they're only going by behaviour they've seen before in whatever, then it's not necessarily, you can't really blame them for acting in that way. We've mostly talked about parental behaviour on the sideline directed towards the children. I think in a next episode we'll talk about parental behaviour directed towards the coach, negative behaviour directed towards the coach, which we can deal with. It's much more insidious, probably far rare. It's rare, but I still think it's an issue that coaches are facing. But just coming back to the solutions, one thing I did this year was I didn't call it a code of conduct. I wrote what's called I called it a manifesto. And what it was it's saying, here's our philosophy about player development. These are the things we ascribe to. So we ascribe to a game-based model, for example. This is why we coach in this way. This is why. This is what you should expect to see. This is why. Selling the why always. And then what we then did was we listed a sort of what we see were expectations. So these are the expectations we have for the children. These are the expectations you should have of us as coaches, and we will hold ourselves accountable to those. And if you see us breaking away from those published accountabilities, we by all means want you to challenge us on that, because we want you to keep us honest. And conversely, these are the expectations that we as coaches have of you as parents. And that can be as simple as being timely, because it's nothing. 5 kids arrive when you just got started and you have to integrate. Yeah. So it's very simple things, but also behavioural things around how they act on the sideline, where they should be, how they should engage, etc., etc. Whether they should just, you quite often have parents who just drop off and go.
Yeah, they're the best ones.
I don't mind them doing that as long as they tell us. So depending on
absolutely. Yeah.
So I think doing that as a starting point, but I only use that as a reference to an induction, because I think quite a lot of clubs have induction evenings, and if they don't, I would advocate doing it, and getting the parents in and just having an informal conversation about, this is what we're about as a club, this is what you can expect from us, and by the way, here's a document that kind of supports all this, and get them to do a nice, and actually what we find when we do that is actually we get some more volunteers as well.
Yeah, the other part that I found successful in the past is to get the parents to write that manifesto or code of conduct or behavioural charter, because I think it's a human behaviour thing that, if you suddenly say, here's a list of things you can't do, people typically don't respond very well to that kind of thing. Sure. But to get all the parents around and go, right, come on, let's talk about the stuff that is good behaviour on the side of the pitch and the bad. Tell me some of the examples that you've seen at other clubs that we should be doing that's great. Right, now tell us about some of the stuff that you think, that's probably a no-no, what I probably shouldn't be doing. That by the time you then have to kind of refer back to it, you can say to the parents, look, you wrote this. You came up with all of this kind of stuff. It's your rules. And it's a lot better than going, right, well, here's a club one, bang, you can't do this on the side of a pitch. Yeah.
I guess I did that actually now you mention it, I did that without thinking about it, because what I did was I kind of put it down and then I put it in front of our junior committee, and that's made up of parent volunteers. So Great. I asked them, what do you think of this? And then they said, well, don't really like that, or I'd add this or whatever. So in a roundabout way, I kind of did get parental involvement in actually the writing of it.
Yeah, which is great. And that kind of, ultimately you want to get to the stage where you don't have to intervene. The other parents will keep each other in check.
Yeah.
And the good ones will kind of like peer manage the other ones and say, look, we don't do that here. Right. You can't do that. And if you can get to that stage where people kind of understand collectively what it's about and how you work as a club and why, as you said rightly, that's the important bit. I think you can have some pretty cool parents, and everything can be kind of fun on a Saturday or Sunday morning or whenever game time is.
And I think that's actually a really good. You've touched on something there that I think is a really important thing to stress, which is what you want. The point you want to get to is when it is self-regulating, because the parents are saying that, like you say, this isn't how we operate. This is, and you're almost creating it. It becomes a cultural thing that they're very proud of, that they want to retain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was one club up in the northwest that had a kind of well-known kind of zero tolerance on the side of the pitch. And and that became their thing, and they kind of managed each other on it. And away teams knew that if they played them at this particular club's ground, that was how they had to behave.
Mm.
And it was very clear. There were signs everywhere. This is what we're about here. It's a zero tolerance. Parental stuff on the side of the pitch, you're not welcome here.
Yeah.
And it became the culture of that club.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, things take time to embed and change, and you're not going to solve it overnight. But certainly, those little kind of tactics and strategies can really help.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've heard of clubs as well. What they've got is they have a nominated behaviour monitor.
Right. So they get like high-vis vest and stuff as well.
Yeah, they did have like one person had the nomination, but the problem is they start to become a bit overzealous. So what they then do is they share it around.
Right.
I mean, you could call it a behaviour monitor, or you call it like a culture convener, or whatever you want to call it. But it's basically somebody who's responsible to have that conversation. So
yeah,
with the coaching.
Yeah, a cultural champion.
There you go. That's a great one. I'm going to write that one down. Cultural champion.
Yeah, you can have that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, our audience can have that. This is why this is all such good stuff. Look, we're coming up on time. I know that we've got a lot more to talk about, and I think this is a subject that we can probably do future episodes on. But I think I'll put this into the show notes so that people have got this as a reference point. Everything that we've talked about in this, we'll put it as a kind of maybe like an infographic so that people can use it as a reference point and maybe share it with the parents. But yeah, there's absolutely loads of really great stuff. So I appreciate your time coming on today and chatting about this with me.
No worries. How do you want people to kind of get involved in the discussion and debate on this?
Well, they've got two options, haven't they? They can either come to thetalentequation.co.uk and share comments, sign up, definitely sign up to and subscribe to it so that I can send you the emails and we can begin a dialogue that way. There's a Facebook group as well, Talent Equation Facebook group. I know you've got your own blog that you talk about, Rivers of Thinking.
Yeah.
What's the URL for that?
It's that riversofthinking.com.
Yeah. And Twitter-wise, there's my Twitter handle is @Stu_arm if you want to follow me, because we'll be sharing more of this information through that channel. You are at
@nlevett, Levett.
@nlevett. So number of different ways. We'll link to all those different ways that you can get involved so that we can continue the communication.
Good stuff. Look forward to more discussion and debate in the future.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Nick. I'll speak to you soon.